In the middle of November, in the year of 1995, a snowstorm descended from the North Sea. Dubbed the November Storm, it tumbled over the western and southern parts of Sweden. The wind broke trees, and the snow rose as high as 40 centimeters. Some would find their cars turned to tombs in the middle of the road. The storm began on the 16th of November and would abate by the evening of the next day. It would take another 4 days of plowing before traffic was able to return to normal. But what I woke up to were the crystal white windows of a house swallowed whole by the natural world. When I woke up on the morning of the November storm, the world had changed, suddenly, if briefly. A force of nature, a material circumstance beyond anyone's control, had altered the world we lived in, and people changed in turn, or at least their priorities did. An unwelcoming house became shelter, and the world outside a thing of awe. It was momentous, it was joyous to see so vast and deep a field of snow. It was one of the few times in my youth that I felt at home, when nature was the most hostile to me it has ever been. I felt most at home. When it was strangest, when it was the most alien, it was the most beautiful. I wonder sometimes how much that day may have affected me throughout my life. You can never really know these things, but it is very much the case that to this day I feel a sense of calm, even tranquility, when there is a thick layer of snow outside. As though, at least for now, all is well in the world. The November storm was no great tragedy. We don't really get many natural catastrophes here in the north, and the ones we get are preposterously mild compared to what is suffered all over the world. My memory of the November storm was not one of being stuck in a car waiting for rescue, but of being trapped in a house I despised, with people who did not like me, with parents who wished I would disappear. And yet, the snow was a comfort. The world we had all gotten used to was gone. Its routines no longer made sense, their material anchors severed by nature. There could be no school, no obligations. The outside world and its horrible, senseless pressures were gone, drowned and frozen, lost below the sea of frigid rain. But, most importantly, this apparent catastrophe not only kept the adults busy, it also meant no one could kick me out of the house. And so, I was left alone, with every excuse in the world to be ignored, and to commit myself to the noble pursuit of playing video games all day. I was late to most every art form that I now enjoy, to literature, painting, film, even music. All except video games.
This is computer. This is computer. Oh, what the hick.
Video games have been a constant throughout my life, and I've never quite understood how anyone could consider them as anything but one of the many art forms of human culture. Being considered art is no great honor, I don't think. Most everything human beings do can be considered art. But I think one of the reasons some people were so reluctant to cram video games onto the plinth of art is due to its brazen escapism. Or at least that's what I expect an outsider to the art form to think. But I've never been an outsider to video games, so I admit to indulging in speculation here. Art, it seems, is supposed to be complexly miserable, or at least very old. And it's only recently that video games have been trying to hit those depressing, morally grey prestige television vibes. I'm not knocking these kinds of games, but it does seem to me that so many of the video games thought of as art, or thought of as more art than most, are more about disempowerment than they are empowerment. Safe to say, you don't pwn noobs in The Last of Us Part 2 or Papers, Please. But I think that also demonstrates how diverse in their purpose and appeal video games are. Many video games are difficult. They demand time and patience and practice. Others are a space to relax, to solve problems, to plan, to socialize, to explore, to be afraid, to think, to go on a psychosexual journey, or to simply be for a while. And almost any video game can be any of these things to a person, or something else entirely. To render an example, I doubt many people watch Hereditary to get a chill hang going, but you can play Diablo to just space out for a while, or to beat a world record, or to socialize, or to go on a psychosexual journey. But whatever the character of the empowerment, I don't think caveat-free empowerment is all that common in video games. Whatever game you're playing, and however you play it, something is demanded of you, and something is causing you trouble. But even if it wasn't, is empowerment necessarily such a tawdry thing? What so many video games do is empower us to do what exactly? Why, they empower us to practice. They empower us to learn, to relax, to plan, to socialize, to explore, to think, to have a farm. Name all your chickens after Byzantine emperors and marry Penny, and if that's not art, then I don't know what is. Empowerment can mean and be a great many things to a great many different people. And yet, when associated with the escapism of entertainment, there is often a somewhat shallow implication, one indicating personal, if not moral, failure. As though time, talent, effort, life itself is being wasted by escaping, by fleeing into worlds of play pretend, into worlds of comfort, into worlds removed from harsh, dignified reality.
Long hours at the screens, psychologists say, can lead to extreme introversion, youngsters communicating in a video fantasy land and not with their peers or parents.
And yet, when we merely glance at the many avenues of supposedly shallow escapism we find across the media of entertainment, something sticks out which seems to contradict this assessment. Be it literature, song, painting, film, television shows, or video games, humans appear reluctant to create worlds devoid of hostility. Hostility is the central aspect of entertainment. Not just physical violence, but emotional struggles, drama. There is no entertainment, no story, no humanity without hostility. This, I think, is partly why video games are especially excellent as escapism. Is it not odd that the one medium in which people do not watch others getting shot is the one most intensely associated with escapism? No, in video games, you shoot people and you get shot. You get punched by a computer or another person, at least virtually. You have to combat encroaching nature. You must balance society so that it doesn't kill itself or is killed by the world. You have to refuse to put your foolish ambitions to rest. It is in video games we find the strangest of worlds. Grim and bleak, slow and insidious. Worlds which loom over the player, their very presence repeating the words, "You're not supposed to be here." This we call escapism, entertainment, shallow, meaningless comfort. Now, I'm sure we all have our comfort games, the kind we return to time and again to just sort of be for a while, or to get through a year-long depressive spiral. In this, I don't doubt there is no less variety among people. A battle royale game can be just as much a comfort game as Animal Crossing. It was in thinking about my own comfort game that this video came about. I do not think my own comfort games are really any less so than any other, but although Stardew Valley may whisper it, the ones I enjoy most appear to scream that self-same declaration. You're not supposed to be here. Some of these games are perhaps odd to include, but not outrageous, I don't think. Darklands, Hollow Knight, Jalopy, Death Stranding, all excellent games that have a melancholy beauty to them. But then there are the others, the ones in which I find the most comfort. Dark Souls, Stalker, or the original Pathologic, a much too mystified game, but that's for another video perhaps. I suppose just let me walk around in a Tarkovsky movie and I'm home. Perchance that renders me a paradeable deviant, but I expect, or at least hope, that this video will end up relating to most everyone. Because we all live in worlds we're not supposed to be in. Worlds hostile to us all, yet of our own creation. However, as comfortable as I find myself in Lordran, Pripyat, or in the shadow of the Polyhedron, none of them quite compare to the principal inspiration for this video. For me, the most comforting of video game worlds that I have yet to come across is the slow, plodding, simplistic, even tedious game, the long, dark. The Long Dark takes place on the fictional Great Bear Island, situated north of Vancouver Island in Canada. It was made by Hinterland Studios and was stuck in early access for a few years. I started playing it a year or so after it had left early access, but free updates have kept on arriving and quite a few additions have come into the game since I first played it. But, quite frankly, all this background information doesn't much matter. It feels a bit like filler or stalling, to be precise. I expect talking about the Long Dark's story mode may be the simpler task, more contained and straightforward, a cozy narrative to dissect. But all that I will say of this game is about its survival mode, not its story mode. Survival mode is an infinite sandbox mode with permadeath, where your only goal is to survive for as long as possible under the eternal winter of Great Bear Island. This has been nearly my entire experience with The Long Dark, and so it's a difficult game to talk about because, well, this is it. What you see here is more or less the game. You walk, and you walk, and you worry, and you plan, find a house to scavenge.
Hope nobody needs this anymore.
And you walk. The snow compacts under your feet. Your backpack rattles. The wind howls. A bark in the distance, a growl, a chirp. And you walk. And you walk. In The Long Dark, your problems are desperate, but simple. Your tasks often plain. There's a little bit of crafting here, but most of it is scavenging, planning, worrying, persisting. If you make your home anywhere, it's not in a shelter of your own construction, but in an abandoned building. Nor can any building be improved or much altered at all. You can break apart some of the furniture for kindling, perhaps, but nothing can be rearranged, nothing new can be built. Creative expression has no significant place here, and what civilization remains is nothing but makeshift shelter and kindling. You are not here to thrive, to build and to conquer nature. You are here to exist, to persist for as long as you can. Or as long as you like.
I guess I've always felt proud of the fact that The Long Dark kind of embraces this idea of being a vulnerability fantasy. So not trying to be another game that makes you feel like an ultimate hero that can kind of overcome all odds, but one that kind of takes it down and reminds you, like, the next can of peaches you eat might be the thing, that kills you, right?
The Long Dark has a reputation for being a realistic survival game, but from what I can gather, that was never really the intention. It may be something of a survival sim, but it's far from a realistic one. The eternal winter of Great Bear Island and its many perils are truly benign in comparison to what this scenario would be like in real life. It seems to me fairly obvious that the game was not developed with absolute realism in mind. Its graphics are heavily stylized, not cartoony, but with a hand-drawn feel to them, emphasizing mood and atmosphere over realism. And the gameplay leans more into an arcadey sensibility. Its primary verbs are walk, run, eat, drink, pick up, sleep, and die. You can't jump in the game. You can't climb except for in a few select places, often requiring a rare rope. You can't swim, or build, or converse. The game's mechanics are dreadfully few and quickly mastered. The challenge lies in seeing how far you can stretch them, and to do so, you need to insulate yourself against more than the brutal cold. In The Long Dark, nature is not your enemy. Not really. Nature is what's keeping you alive. No, what's actually going to get you is time and chance. Getting ambushed by a wolf or a bear emerging over the crest of a hill, or being caught in a blizzard when you're not sure where you are, that'll get you. But even worse than such vicious chance is time. There are people who have survived on Great Bear Island for ridiculous periods of time. As far as I know, the record stands at 10 in-game years on Interloper, the hardest difficulty. But even getting to 500 days is a behemoth of a task that few get all that far past. Survival mode isn't actually an infinite sandbox mode. There is an absolute limit. Everything will decay eventually in The Long Dark. It could take as long as 10 in-game years, but your clothes will deteriorate over time with no further means of repairing them. All your tools broken, all whetstones spent, all metal on every map used up. Matches and fire strikers will run out too, and your only means of making fire will be to hope for a sunny day so that you can use a magnifying glass to get a fire going. But at that point you'll spend an inordinate amount of energy looking for sticks and breaking apart branches with your bare hands that you'd spend your entire time awake trying to keep the fire going. Even here at the end, your problems remain desperate, but simple. Throughout the game, you'll find the frozen corpses of fellow survivors. Even when these corpses are inside a building, you cannot move them. And after playing the game for a while, it may occur to you that this is your only future here. Every corpse you find is another version of yourself, what you will inevitably become. Unless you shut the game off and never return, this is you. The only possible result of any and all effort you could ever muster within this world. The Long Dark presents us with a world we can no longer claim belongs to us, and it lingers with me in a way few, if any, video game worlds have. It feels like a place that exists even if I'm not in it. When I die or exit the game, it feels as though it will go on without me. This world is one of disempowerment, but not just a disempowerment of the player. In the Long Dark you roam about a world where the ruins of our reign are in the periphery. This is a world no longer under human invasion, under human occupation. In this sense, we could see the world of Great Bear Island as another in a long line of post-apocalyptic video game worlds. And what it can show us is the character of apocalypse and how it is defined. To humanity, apocalypse is subjugation. An apocalypse is when some extra-human force dominates us, takes from us what meager control we've been able to wrestle from the hostile nature of our homeworld. A control wrestled from nature the way one may wrestle an ever-wriggling fish. The grasp uneasy, the scales rough. What we find with the Long Dark is an example of how little is required for apocalypse. All you need for the end of the world is for nature to be left alone, for it to slip completely out of our grasp and fly back into its waters. The prevalence of empowerment in video games may partly explain the common theme of post-apocalypse in video game worlds. It provides an attractive fantasy. The hostility of the world made manifest. Hollowed out shambles of ancient soldiers, bands of mutant dogs roving around irradiated industries, a town filled with secrets, corruption and plague, and you, inside of it all, able to survive and thrive within the hellscape. I'd argue that the post-apocalyptic setting is much more often than not about our relationship to nature, if for no more reason than that they tend to put focus on human survival. But on top of that, so many of these worlds and stories are about how we can or should persist. In Dark Souls, the player finds themselves entangled in primordial truths, forced into two choices, one the norm, the other suppressed. The continuation of a vicious cycle of civilization and power, or the cessation of all, and the return to the nothingness in which we all belong and in which we may no longer harm anyone. The fire can here be seen as that thing most human, a tool of absolute destruction being central to our basic survival. To light the flame is to survive and to destroy. To continue persisting is to perpetually harm the world and each other. In the Stalker series, we find a take on the irradiated post-apocalyptic wasteland much different from that of the Fallout or Metreaud series. In Stalker, a man-made catastrophe is a source of opportunism. It brings new wealth and knowledge to our species, but it also returns a part of the world back to nature. From mutant boars and disembodied pyrogeists, to anomalies, supernatural artifacts, wish granters, and psionic power, our nuclear sins, giving nature a power both tangible and unknowable. What survives the splitting of the atom is the natural world, and it only grows stronger and more hateful. In turn, what humans do is to find new ways to harvest it. When nature becomes more than itself, humanity seeks new ways of becoming inhuman. In Pathologic, progress finds itself in the shape of a polyhedron stabbed into the side of a town. The resulting plague a consequence of nature. Nature here cast as a mystical force, farther beyond human understanding than we like to brag. The effects of the polyhedron unmasks the stubborn efforts of human science as a farce, an attempt at conquering a world we don't understand, and least of all respect. And because of this, our only means of conquering it is to attempt to remove ourselves from it, through any means whatsoever, including self-appointed superiority. And in the midst of all this, humanity remains selfish. The plague becomes a backdrop, its cause an enticing mystery. The actual problems in the player's way are local factions, economics, religious beliefs, moral justifications, the military, bureaucracy, grudges, feuds, and egos. In Pathologic, you don't survive the plague, or nature, you survive humanity, because that's the only thing approaching any kind of sense. The Long Dark is perhaps then a more direct, one may even be tempted to say purer version of this fantasy of survival. A concern with the meaning of survival is already made evident when you start a new game in The Long Dark. The first thing you'll see is a quote about nature and survival and humanity, often leaning towards the meaning of survival as found within individual experience. Almost all of these quotes concern persistence. In The Long Dark, in not just these brief quotes, within its world and gameplay, I think we can clearly see this emphasis on persistence being the true meaning of survival. A fact which is really kind of fucking grim. Survival has a certain glory to it. A ruggedness, a return to nature, a return to something true and real. And there is no shortage of writers and, it appears, quotes to perpetuate the idea that you find out who you really are, or you grow as a person or whatever, when faced with harsh nature and surviving its miserable bullshit. An attitude no doubt derived from a life spent within the comforts of running water and central heating. Because how human beings survive nature is primarily the product of an unnatural imagination. Human survival is deeply unnatural The deer have no need to kill and wear the skins of other creatures. The wolf needs no fire to stay warm. The fish need not make tools to thrive. The trees need not sing songs to alleviate tedium. The flowers need not hold each other close to feel calm and loved. Only humans need all this to live. The relationship we humans have to nature is intrinsically one of mutual hostility, because we are alien to nature, and nature is alien to us. And yet, is it not beautiful? The world of Great Bear Island may be among the most hostile of video game worlds out there. It is fundamentally inhuman, vicious, and cruel. But I'm not at all surprised to find people describe their experience with the game as meditative, and that for many it's used as a tool for improving one's mental health. However, we're still left with our central question. Why do we find comfort in existentially hostile worlds? Why would anyone wish to escape into a world designed to cause you harm? There are plenty of lovely video game worlds to spend time in, and yet I, like so many others, are perpetually drawn into these existentially horrifying worlds. Worlds of suffering and hostility, or worlds that refuse human comprehension. One reason for this, I think, is that fantasy of conquest of a kind, of survival, of overcoming a world gone wrong. But, as already mentioned, there are all sorts of games and many reasons and ways to play them. I think it's tempting to think of games like The Long Dark or Dark Souls or Stalker or Pathologic as being closer to actual human experience and therefore less effective escapism. Not closer to human experience in the literal sense, of course, although Pathologic has depressingly aged like fine tobacco, but emotionally closer to human experience. However, I don't think this is quite right. Games like Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing, though less grim, are not really any different. Here are games whose purpose is to combat nature, to conquer it, squeeze wealth and comfort out of its bounty, and use it to violently shape the world to your liking. These worlds are no less hostile. In a video game, no one is actually punching you in your literal, actual face. No one is shooting you. No sweat is spent tilling the fields or being confronted with your depressing financial situation. Animal Crossing and Dark Souls are no different in this sense. They are each, in their own way, hostile worlds. So what is one to make of this prevalence of hostility within the works of human imagination? What is one to make of the fact that the art form most expert at escapism is brimming with worlds full of adversity? To interrogate this and to begin to answer this question, we must first discuss a 90-year-old geographer and a long-dead farmer.
Tuan, professor of geography at the University of Minnesota. He's a companion of the Pearce County Geographical Society, and I'm told that he moonlights as a defensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yifu Tuan is a Chinese-American geographer, perhaps most famous for his book Space and Place. But the one I'd like to talk about here is his conveniently titled work, Escapism, from 1998. It is, as far as I know, one of the few books dealing with this subject, and it's a pretty good read. Tuan's central argument is that, as he puts it, escape is inescapably human. The book is really a collection of observations on this phenomena, exploring the many ways in which humans escape, and what they escape from, to, and why, even when that from is also the to, and the why is unsound. Tuan's central concern throughout the book is how human culture is little more than a collection of escapist enterprises. What he's talking about here is more a lowercase culture than an uppercase one. So not just prestigious art, but everything from language to architecture and technology, to moral beliefs, to religion, to culinary traditions and table manners. All that separates humanity from the natural world. Tuan comes to argue that we build civilizations not because we have some divine spark, but because that's how we survive the vicious planet we were born into. But base biological survival was never enough for us either. For the human body to truly survive, its mind must thrive as well. Nature will never be enough, not for survival nor for happiness. It's a rare few of us that make it out there in the inhuman world of wild nature. And so we built our own worlds, villages, towns and cities, homes and buildings and streets. We made fires and candles and electric lights to kill the darkness of night, walls and clothes to keep out the wind and the cold. But peppered throughout the book is a curious idea, one not quite acknowledged or confronted by Tuan. Escape, Tuan comes to argue, is the prerequisite for sentience, because the need to escape, both physiologically and psychologically, from nature is the source of our uniquely human imagination. In this view, consciousness does not arise from self-reflection or raw brain power, but from imagination. These other classical markers of consciousness are merely the byproducts of imagination, byproducts of the survival need to escape from the hostility of the natural world. In other words, Tuan argues that escapism is not a regrettable problem or personal failing, but the source of all that we call human, for good or ill. The ill part is given a special weight throughout the book. Tuan does highlight many of the positive aspects of this need to escape, but he doesn't really delve much into the role of art as escapism. And I think this might be why the evils of escape tend to be so pronounced throughout the book. It's no surprise then that the most striking chapter in the book is the one simply titled Hell. In many instances throughout this chapter especially, Tuan seems to argue that a common source of human evil is the need to escape from either humanity or from our own self-awareness. Destructiveness as such has an appeal to humans that is not evident in other animals. What is the nature of the appeal? Power. Power is the beginning of an answer. For many people, destruction is the clearest evidence of their ability to change the world, and hence the most convincing proof of their own existence, their own reality and worth. As successful as we have been at transforming our world to suit us, it is a brutal success. Escapism though at the core of our sentience and being, is not something we've ever been all that good at. We humans are clumsy, violent, fickle, needlessly destructive. What sanctuaries we do make in the form of civilizations and groups are prone to power hunger, hierarchy, domination, and exploitation, all in the name of escape, if not from the natural world, then from the shitty world we ourselves made. Because what else are these worlds of ours, whether it is art or civilization, but an escape from nature as much as it is an escape from humanity? This is what makes our escape so brutal yet feeble. Because we can escape. We can escape from everything, it seems, except ourselves and each other. And perhaps that's what our species is still trying to figure out. The point on which our extinction precariously pivots. If we do not belong in the natural world, can we make our own worlds in which we may all belong with each other? Now then, if you, like me, have a fondness for guerrilla gardening,
That over there is, let's see, I did a bunch of illegal tree planting. That's one of mine.
or just possess a general environmentalist bent, you may have heard of the Japanese farmer Masanobu Fukuoka. His most famous written work is The One Straw Revolution, published in 1975. And it's kind of a strange book to acquire the reach it did. It's a book ripe for Western hippies to indulge their wisdom of the East Orientalism, and I do not doubt this contributed to its Western popularity at the time. But the actual text is one part autobiography, one part religious text, one part philosophical text, and one large part a dry, practical guide to farming. Fukuoka himself was an agricultural researcher for much of his life, before dedicating himself to farming, using a technique he developed, which he referred to as natural farming. We find within the writings of Fukuoka the same thing we find within his practice of natural farming, an explicit disbelief in the modern conception of progress. Progress, to Fukuoka, was an illusion, comical in its foolishness. Human beings, with their tampering, do something wrong, leave the damage unrepaired, and when the adverse results accumulate, work with all their might to correct them. When the corrective actions appear to be successful, they come to view these measures as splendid accomplishments. People do this over and over again. It is as if a fool were to stomp on and break the tiles of his roof. Then, when it starts to rain and the ceiling begins to rot away, he hastily climbs up to mend the damage, rejoicing in the end that he has accomplished a miraculous solution. To Fukuoka, the human need to escape from nature has caused us to deny nature its own intrinsic value. This, I think, is one of the most beautiful of Fukuoka's ideas. The deceptively simple idea that nature, has inherent worth, that a field matters all on its own, that the trees and fruits and the mountains are not made for us, we just happen to be here, and, consequently, that to measure human progress in our ability to dominate nature causes us to treat one another no differently. Because if something as beautiful as nature does not have inherent worth, then why should a human being?
この一年一年ね、自然がダウンしてきて、自然に関白ネイチャーという気持ちは非常に高まってきてる。だけど日本人の自然に関白ネイチャーというのはね、本当のネイチャーに帰るというよりも工業立国というかね、カルチャーとかカルチャーをこう文明を盛んにするために自然を守ると。自然を関白じゃなくて自然を守りながら文明を発達させようとしてる。だから本当のね、自然に復活じゃなくて人間の都合のいいような自然にむしろ利用しようとしてるだけなんですね。
The escape to nature is also an escape from nature. People only want to return to a version of nature that suits them. Be it mountain climbing, hiking, or cottagecore, nature is not allowed its own existence, but must always exist as function, resource, set dressing, utility. In Fukuoka's view, the problems of society and civilization have their root in the pursuit of progress, in the pursuit for more. Fukuoka believed life to be without purpose, that it was inherently meaningless. However, this is not coming from a place of nihilism, but from the various ideas and beliefs found specifically within Shintoism, Zen Buddhism, and Taoism. To declare life meaningless is more of an impossible challenge than anything else. And in the tradition of the religious philosophies he draws from, Fukuoka is keen on asking unanswerable questions and then deriding himself for even mentioning them. One such question appears towards the end of the book. If you'll indulge me. The other morning, I heard a 4-year-old girl ask her mother, why was I born into this world, to go to nursery school? Naturally, her mother could not honestly say, yes, that's right, so off you go. And yet, you could say that people these days are born to go to nursery school. Right up through college, people study diligently to learn why they were born. Scholars and philosophers, even if they ruin their lives in the attempt, say they will be satisfied to understand this one thing. Originally, human beings had no purpose. Now, dreaming up some purpose or other, they struggle away trying to find the meaning of life. It is a one-man wrestling match. There is no purpose one has to think about or go out in search of. You would do well to ask the children whether or not a life without purpose is meaningless. Progress has here rendered a system in which a human being is constructed into a life of purpose. Not of meaning, mind you, but purpose. A human being is made into a resource, human beings existing for their utility. The exploitation of nature requires the exploitation of humanity. The result is that, as Fukuoka writes, we have created a hard world and now struggle to break out of it. Within Fukuoka's religious philosophy, there is undoubtedly a romanticizing of nature where he grants it a heightened status, similar to a kind of divinity. There is also within his religious writing what one may charitably call humility, but what may more accurately be referred to as self-deprecation. Fukuoka wished for God, nature, and man to become one, as they apparently once were. What I like about his conception of God and nature is that he held the view that God did not create the world, but that he came to dwell here. To Fukuoka, nature was so lovely and incredible all on its own that it attracted divinity, and I think that's just kind of nice. But what I find most striking about Fukuoka's religious writings is his expression of the confusion of human endeavors. He is deeply skeptical of science and reason, not in the anti-vax fashion, mind you, but more in a Karl Popper kind of way, explaining them as being attempts to distance humanity from nature, efforts in self-aggrandizement and delusion, our intellect used not for wisdom but for justifying our actions. Humanity reaching out, expanding, with the only result being further domination, violence born out of fear and confusion, our reasons being capital, growth, the market, nationalism. It doesn't really matter. Anything to make our own lives feel and appear important. Anything at all to make us think our lives are somehow more important than that of a mayfly. That said, didn't Fukuoka likewise escape to nature, the way humans often do when society is disagreeable to them? Tuan makes this exact point, that the escape to nature is but another version of the escape from nature, and Fukuoka does show some awareness of this in his writing. It appears throughout his many self-deprecating passages. Fukuoka was perhaps doing what many of the scientists he was skeptical of were attempting as well. And Fukuoka's attempt was no less fraught with personal doubts and troubles and foolishness, as he himself admits. He did what so many human beings do when they escape. They escape not to a better world merely for themselves, but in an attempt to forge a better world for all people. He effectively put his imagination into practice, and however much he may have derided himself as a fool and questioned his heart, is it not motive enough that he loved nature and wished for it to live and thrive? None of us can escape back to nature because we were never natural to begin with. But is it so bad to escape to nature and live alongside it as a caretaker and appreciator? To Fukuoka, that was escape to a better world, and though it is not for me, I can't help but admire it. If escapism seems to you an inherent problem, a social ill that ought to be stomped out, then the question arises: why is this world we made not good enough of an escape? If the worlds of art, or more specifically, if the digital worlds of video games are preferable to the worlds constructed by civilization, then I think that says more about the failure of civilizations than it does video games, or film, or books, or amusement parks. Because this world of buildings and streets and cars and roads, this electric world of money and jobs and politics, this abusive dream we call civilization, is no less a fiction than the cold, implacable world of Great Bear Island. What Tuan detailed and Fukuoka enacted was the ability for human beings to create. To escape nature, humanity uses its imagination to create. We have the ability to reshape the world, And we do it not just materially, but more often than not we do it by altering our perception of the world, for good or ill. By merely thinking of the world differently, we can change its shape. Nature can be the home of the divine, or the home of ancient terror, or it can be a keeper of the secrets of the universe, or it can be a green thing that stands in the way. Escape is inescapably human. When we use our imagination to bend our perceptions into thinking escape is the problem, what we're really saying is that being human is the problem. I was born in a city, and I have all my life been an inveterate admirer of cities. To me, a vine is made more beautiful when climbing concrete, and my neighbors are pigeons and crows rather than cows and chickens and wolves. My own love of nature is one developed far away from its many dangers and brutalities. It is a love developed in the deep shadow of violent human domination. Fukuoka rejected this, but I do not. I think Fukuoka was right in criticizing human progress and civilization as the result of confusion and fear, but I don't think that was or is always the case. The cultures, societies, and civilizations we have dreamed up in our reckless, fearful escape are the source of both terror and wonder. But I think it's something of a knee-jerk reaction to humble ourselves before nature, to devalue humans as some wicked blight, as destructive filth, as spreading corruption on the body of the cosmos. Humans are amazing. So are cities and houses and electric lights and books and concrete monstrosities and farming and music and railways and clothes and video games. When we cast ourselves into the role of the parasite, a miserable fleshy thing that stands in the way of eternal nature, then we're treating humanity no differently than when we exploit each other as a resource. What Fukuoka applied to nature, we ought also apply to human beings. Because no human is a tool. No human is a resource. We don't exist for utility or function. We should all be allowed to exist, simply to be. Escapism, imagination, humanity has intrinsic worth. Now let us return, here at the end, to our central question. Why do we escape into hostile worlds? It's because we're not supposed to be here. This is an ontological truth from which we can never escape. Which isn't to say we won't try. We're human, after all. But when I say we are alien, this is the truth I am referring to. There is a contradiction within human sentience, something which came to be from escapism, from our survival need to reject nature. And yet, though I claim humanity is unnatural, that unnatural state arose from nature. Our incompatibility with nature is what made us human. To be unnatural is what made us human. And it is our relationship with nature which makes us able to be unnatural at all, making natural our unnaturalness. here we are then, stuck in a contradiction of being. An unnatural mind floating inside of a natural body. A creature which runs in terror from the wolf, only to turn around and wonder at how fucking majestic it was. A creature which sees a tree and venerates it as divinity while it chops down others for the destructive fire it needs to live. A truly ridiculous creature. We are all aliens, in whatever world we find ourselves in. It can never be otherwise. Perhaps that's why we love nature, why we find inspiration and imagination spring from it. We may never be equal to it, never be one with it, ever the outsiders, ever the aliens, but I like to think that's why it never ceases to enchant us. No matter how hostile and vicious, it's something wonderful when you think about it, that human beings continually find meaning and inspiration and beauty in a world designed to cause us indifferent harm. We humans can, as Fukuoka did, see God in a flower, and we can, as Tuan pointed out, look to the terrors of the infinite cosmos and be filled with awe and a drive to shoot an arrow beyond the stars. This planet, this world, nature looms over us and it tells us, repeats it over and over again, you're not supposed to be here. And we feel it, we know it, and we try and we fail to fashion worlds we do belong in. But we can't escape our human nature. We can't escape our ontological predicament. And what exceptional beauty we find because of that predicament. In the end, we don't belong anywhere except with each other. And so it may, as a result, be inherent to our human nature to love that which is alien to us, to find beauty in what is hostile to our existence, to find imagination in nature.